the faith and those who live it. I'm your host, Renee Kranz. In the studio with me today is Father Andy Thuringer. Welcome, Father Andy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Father Thuringer has not been on Catholic Views with me before. Were you with Jerry at all?
No, me and Chris Bergwald sat down once.
That's
for
right,
Ignition.
for Ignition. So it's his first time on Catholic Views. Well, such a milestone in your life. Father Thuringer is the parochial vicar for the Our Lady of Victory Pastorate. That includes St. Michael in Sioux Falls and St. George in Hartford. And he's been at St. George for a little bit before that, which is cool. We'll hear about some of that here as we talk to him. But we wanted him to come in and talk about how he got his call to the priesthood, what it's been like so far, and we'll see what else we have time for, because I think he has a really good story. At least he indicates he does. So.
I hope so.
They're all good because they're all real. And they're all, the voice of God telling someone to go do the thing he wants them to do. So we want to hear that stuff. So will you please start by telling us about your family, where you grew up, that kind of stuff?
So right now it's kind of beautiful because I'm the parochial vicar at St. Michael's, and that's my home parish. I grew up in Sioux Falls, went to Mass there every weekend. My dad, Daryl, has actually worked at the diocese for some time.
I worked with him for a short time.
And my mom, Anita, and then I have two little sisters, and I'm the oldest.
Okay.
Yep.
Oldest out of three.
Oldest out of three.
I have three in my family. I'm not the oldest, middle. Okay, so you grew up in Sioux Falls.
Went through the Catholic school system in elementary school, junior high, high school at O'Gorman.
Okay.
In fact, I was one of the first, I think the day St. Michael's opened, it was on the newspaper and all the kids were wearing Burger King crowns, because I don't know why crowns, but we're celebrating. And so I was on the front page of the Argus with a Burger King crown being like, ah.
That's awesome. I remember when that church first opened. I didn't live here at the time, because what year was that? I have
no idea when it opened, but because it was much later. It was in the,
that's true, was the school.
In like 90 something when the school finally opened.
That's right. I don't think the parish was that far in front of that.
So it's pretty cool today. Like every Mass I have, I walk down the aisle and put my finger for the holy water in the baptistry where I was baptized.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah.
There's not very many people who can say that, especially as a priest.
Well, it's not common to get placed where you were. Yeah. When Jesus went back home and tried to preach, they tried to throw him off a cliff.
True. Have they tried to throw you off any cliffs? Yeah.
No. St. Michael's is awesome. They've been really, really wonderful.
That's good.
It's been cool to be home. Sometimes it's weird being in the school because I'm helping teach with one of my old teachers, which is both weird and a blessing.
Yeah, so, no kidding. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to hear about how you got your call to the priesthood, but did you have a plan for something before you got that call? Like, were you thinking, I'm going to be a doctor or whatever, fireman? Was there something you were planning on?
Yes, near the end of high school, I was all sports.
Okay.
I was football, wrestling, track.
Okay.
And my knee started to click and to feel really weird. And I went to the doctor, and it ended up being a problem that needed 3 knee surgeries to fix.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was told I would probably never even run again.
Wow.
It was real serious. And so all of a sudden, it was like, oh, sports is out the window. And so I got really into theater.
Okay.
And just fell in love with it. And did plays and competitive acting called Interp and different things like that. And so near the end of high school, the only thing that I was truly deeply passionate about, besides my faith, which was a big part of my life, but was acting. So I went around and auditioned at a couple of places, and I got into frankly a really nice theater school, and that was the plan. I wanted to be a theater actor.
Okay, so that's maybe it's really not that different from priest. Because I've seen you use your theater background and your love of it to great effect as a priest.
I did, and we'll get into this a little bit in the story, but I did end up going to that theater school just for my freshman year before I entered seminary, and I always thank God for that time. One, it was probably good for me to be on my own and learn how to do laundry and different things like that.
Yeah.
But the other side of it was sometimes people would be like, oh, that must be helpful because you're up there acting at church. And I'm like, I hope and pray that I'm never acting during the Mass. It's the most real thing I do every day.
Yes.
Right? But what it taught me was how to tell a story.
Yes.
And how to play a part in telling a story and how to do it well. And that I hope that I use for God's kingdom each and every day. So I'm always super grateful for that time.
Yeah, I bet you have good homilies from all of that.
I hope so.
Yeah. Okay, so will you tell us how you got your call to the priesthood?
Yeah, so I mentioned I did competitive acting, right? And my junior year, I had qualified for nationals.
Okay.
And probably in a little bit of youthful arrogance, I assumed, well, if I qualified as a junior, I'm gonna qualify as a senior, right?
Okay.
And a mentor of mine who was in the youth ministry of the diocese, Bob Siemens, kept bugging me all year about do this thing called Totus Tuus, now called Lumen Christi, right? Do this thing called Totus Tuus, give your summer to God. And I was like, hey, that sounds really interesting, Bob, but I'm going to be busy, right? Well, we got to the qualifying tournament. I got knocked out in the first round.
Oh, boy.
Like a chump, right? And just heartbroken, walked down the hallway, and God gave me this little, and I pulled out my phone and I called Bob like minutes after finding out and was like, hey, my summer's free. Do you still need somebody? And he was like, yeah. So literally I did my high school all-nighter lock-in, the day after the day of graduation. That morning, got let out of the high school, hopped in a car, and went down to Broomtree for training to be a catechist for the summer as part of Totus Tuus. And near the end of my time there, it was one of the most blessed summers of my life. There's a reason I still do Last Scholar Standing and really love fundraising for Lumen Christi because it changed my life. It really cemented the fact that I wanted to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Well, one of the last parishes we were in, every Thursday night we held adoration. And so we would always kind of model for the kids to pray because they were always so like uptight and in their pews and stuff. And so one of us would usually be like the mannequin and go up, just as a display to go up and kneel like right in front of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament to show them that like he won't bite, you know?
Right.
And so I said, hey, I'll do that, and went up to pray. And frankly, I don't even know how much my heart was in it. I'm sure I was praying, but not like super deep. I was just, this is the job. And I went and looked up at the Eucharist and heard Andy, come be my priest. And it was so real that I turned around, like surely somebody's messing with me. And there was nobody there. And that's when I really freaked out. And I stood up without thinking, turned around, and began to walk out of the church. And then about halfway down the aisle, realized I'm supposed to be chaperoning all of these high schoolers and junior high kids, and I look like a crazy person. And I was like, what am I going to do to like play this off, right? And I noticed the confessional light was on. And I was like, oh, that's okay. I'll model that the kids should go to confession. I'll go to confession,
Right.
So I made a beeline and went into the confessional and confessed my sins. But frankly, the whole time the priest was giving me advice, I wasn't really listening. I was praying. I was like, Lord, if I'm not crazy, or maybe I'm prideful, and this is me and not you. If this is really you, I need some sign. Right. I'm not saying when, I'm not saying what, but I need something more to know that this wasn't just me.
Right.
And the priest gave me absolution. I stood up, turned around, my hand was on the doorknob, and the priest said, hey, 1 second, are you one of my kids? And I said, no, I'm one of the missionaries. And he goes, oh, that makes sense. Okay, I just think you should know you'd be a really good priest.
I love these stories, I have to tell you.
So I freak out.
Yeah.
And later that night, I'm like hyperventilating, talking to the guy on my team. And he was very prudent, and he said, look, it's probably too late for you to sign up to go to seminary this year anyway. And God doesn't ask us to do things that we can't do.
Right.
So give it this year of studying theater. And at the end of that, you're going to have to make a choice whether you're going to follow this from God or not. And went off to theater school, absolutely loved it. Fell in love with the craft of acting. Before it was a hobby, and it became like a passion.
Right.
And I learned an awful lot. And frankly, I did pretty well. In fact, that was kind of a problem because things were going so well. Freshmen at that school were the gum under the table.
Sure.
They speak when spoken to.
Right.
They don't get cast in plays.
Sure.
And I got cast in 2 major plays.
Wow.
And was like well reviewed for it. And it was like, oh, I might not be one of those starving actors. I might actually have a chance at this.
Right.
And so then, but I still the seminary thing. And so I would call, back then Father Paul Rutten was the vocations director. And so I'd call him every once in a while, just talk with him about it. And he always had this way of like sticking the knife in and twisting it. So I'd say, oh, Father Paul, I'm thinking about seminary, but I don't know if I'm going to go this year. I think I just need to discern a little bit more. And he'd say, Andy, you don't discern to go to seminary. You go to seminary to discern.
Yes.
And I was just like, I felt so convicted. Or one time I was like, God is making things go really well here. Why would he give me these gifts if he didn't want me to use them?
Yeah.
And he was like, Andy, that's a really good point. Just remember that the disciples had to drop their nets.
Yeah.
Even one of them was named Andrew,
Yes.
We were coming toward the end of the year, and I was really coming to a kind of a decision point on this. And I got cast in a play called The Brighton Beach Memoirs by Neil Simon.
Yeah.
And I played the father of this family in the Bronx in the 1930s, right on the cusp of World War II. And the family was falling apart, all these different things, and always at each other's throats and all this stuff. And the father was kind of the glue that held it all together. And then he has a heart attack in the second act, and so he's weak and all this stuff. And on top of that, the guy who played my son, who's actually older than me and also named Andrew, but his character, who's my son, goes off to join the military because he thinks he can send his money back. And that's my worst nightmare, the father character's worst nightmare. Well, near the very end of the show, the son comes back. And there's this beautiful prodigal son moment.
Yeah.
And the line, which I'll never forget till the day I die, the line was, "Don't you know that there's nothing that you could ever do that would be so terrible that I couldn't forgive you?" And, backstage, me and him would sit and talk, and we'd talk about the scene, and we'd be like, "Oh, do you need me to jump on that line a little bit more? Do you need me to back off, give you some space on that?" We tweak it. Well, by opening night, we could literally hear grown men crying in the audience. Wow. And we were like, "It's done. It's done. Don't touch it. It's perfect." And so then we'd sit backstage, and we didn't have to talk about the play anymore. We just talk.
Right.
And one night we're sitting there, and he says, "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" I was like, "Yeah, what's up?" He said, "Well, I don't know my father.
Oh.
And I don't care to. He abandoned me and my mom when I was a baby. And as far as I'm concerned, I hate him." He said, "But I really love doing this show because for 2 hours a night, I get to have a really good dad."
Oh.
And in that moment, God just reached out and grabbed my heart. And he was like, "That's the priesthood. You are younger than this man. You have no business being his father. But it's a part you've been called to play, and because of it, he received something that he needed." And all of the fear that I had about leaving acting and joining seminary just evaporated. And the next morning, I had the grace to call Father Rhett and say, "Okay, send me the forms." And that was only the beginning of another 7 years of discernment in the seminary.
Right.
But I always say, I think, that was a long story, and I apologize if I got
that's
onto
a great story.
But I always say, God knows I'm a drama queen, and he knew he would give me a story that I liked to tell.
Yeah, that is a great story. So you did have some fear about, well, I think most men do, when you are sitting in adoration or kneeling in adoration and something like that happens to you, it's like, okay, wait. You aren't expecting that, I'm sure. And there's got to be lots of fear in there.
There was even resistance. My dad told me a story like a year ago that I have no memory of. But apparently I was in junior high. And God must have already been working in my heart, but I was, too young and silly to notice it. But we would pray the vocations prayer. Do you remember in almost all the parishes we used to do that? And my dad noticed one day I didn't pray it. And so in the parking lot, he was like, "Hey, why aren't you praying the vocation prayer?" And apparently I said, "I'm not ready." So I think there was this resistance in my heart for a while. And I think if there are young men out there who feel that, where their impulse, their first thing is like, "No, not me.
Yeah.
Not me. You got the wrong guy."
Yeah.
Like, you're not alone there. That's super common.
Yeah.
But God will give the grace particular to you if he's calling you to say yes to that. And it might not be like mine at all. He knows you better than you know you, But he gave me the grace to be able to say yes to that.
Yeah. And he really had you come to the realization to go to seminary in a very beautiful way that incorporated something you loved. I mean, you don't always hear that in the story. So I love that you included that. And thank you for telling us that part. Okay. So you're in seminary. What was the biggest blessing in seminary? And was it hard? Was it hard to discern all of that?
Yeah. So I want to separate, maybe give you a two-part answer.
Yeah.
The biggest blessing of seminary is the formation, that your job for, 6 to 8 years is to grow as holy as you can. And you are given all the space and time and tools just to develop your relationship with God.
Yeah.
And it can be very easy to take that for granted, but there are so many people who will never in their life do something like an 8-day retreat. and we did them once a year.
Right.
And so the seminary itself is the biggest blessing, right? But if I had to pick one that was outside the box, kind of fun or whatever. Yeah. One of the coolest things was the way that God ended up using theater. Because, and I think I've shared this story before on Lead 'Em to Life.
Oh, Oh, okay. Yeah.
But really quickly,
Yeah.
when I got to seminary, there was a guy there who used to write plays who had joined the
nice.
seminary.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden, we put together this theater company, and once a year, we'd put on an original Catholic show.
Oh, wow.
Completely done by the seminaries just as a community builder.
Uh-huh.
And it took like a year or two for people like if the Catholic show put on by seminarians with no budget sounds like a bad Saturday night, I don't blame you. But after like 2 years, people realized we knew what we were doing, and we would do 3 shows, lines out the door, turning people away.
Oh, that's awesome.
The best one we did was called Moonshine Abbey, and it's about monks during the Prohibition.
Uh-huh.
And how they peacefully resisted the government. And it was roaring 20s jazz and Gregorian chant smashed together. And it was so fun. And so it was just a beautiful gift to like, by the way, one of the things we did there was guys who were afraid of doing homilies, we would cast them.
Yeah.
And to get them over some of that crowd fear and give them confidence. And so like it was just a huge blessing and like so much fun. And the fact that I got to use that theater, that it for a while was an obstacle for me going to the seminary. And the fact that I got to use all those skills to literally preach the gospel was like such icing on top of the cake.
Yeah.
It was a huge blessing.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything that stands out from the day you were ordained? Because what year were you ordained?
2017.
17. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything stand out? Because that would have been Bishop Swain.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There are kind of 2 things
Okay.
that stand out to me. One I didn't see. It was shared with me later, which is that I have some family, and I love my family, but I do have some family that really doesn't practice, right? And one of my family members, I'll keep it all anonymous, but my parents told me later that, this family member probably hasn't been to Mass in who knows how long. And he said that they were just in tears because of how beautiful it was. And so, I also thought it was a beautiful Mass. And so, like, there's something about ordinations that actually, like, it's such inside baseball. A lot of Catholics have probably never even been to an ordination, but it's evangelistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's powerful. And then kind of a funny moment, we all go down on the ground and we lay down our lives as the people of God, pray for us with the litany of saints, right? And then the bishop gets up and does one thing, and we're supposed to stay flat. And then he wants to finish the prayer, and we're supposed to get up, right? And you've been on the ground for a while, and so you're like, and I had Father Sean Haggerty was kneeling next to me while I was laying down. I was on the far edge or whatever. So I started to get up early, and he put his hand on my back and he said, "Stay down, son."
I can totally hear him doing that.
And it's actually funny because it's kind of a grace that I think every once in a while I have to tell myself, like, to continue to lay down my life. And then as I do that, I always hear Father Haggerty go, "Stay down, son."
Stay down, son. That's awesome. You have some good ones. Awesome. Okay, so we only have 2 to 3-ish minutes left. What's been the biggest blessing for you as being a priest? And maybe if there's been a challenging thing.
Yeah, I absolutely love praying the Mass. Okay. It is some of that theater stuff, and but like the words of consecration, I cannot tell you. And obviously every priest loves those words.
Yes.
And it's a deep part of our identity. But it's amazed me. I kind of wondered early on in my priesthood, like, would this be a grace for a time, but eventually it would kind of fade?
Oh, sure, yeah.
And it just hasn't.
Yeah.
I relish that moment every day. Also, just there have been so many individual graces working with people, a lot of which I probably couldn't share, but the ways that God has worked through my priesthood, often without me even being aware of like what he's doing to their hearts through me, is just beautiful.
Yeah.
If there's one challenge, for young priests, I think, and it's on purpose, but we get moved more than older priests.
Yeah.
The bishop wants us to get different experiences, different leadership styles from pastors, different communities, different sizes, be in a city, be rural and all this stuff. But so far, I've been moved on average about every year and a half.
Yeah. That's a lot.
And I'm, grateful for the grace to be able to say yes and to play my part in our diocese. That's also just a lot.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to say goodbye to so many communities, especially when I feel like I've kind of just arrived.
Yeah.
But I know a priest once, he got moved like almost every year because he worked in a college, right? He would have a new group of students almost every year. And he told me that the key to that, like the way he could do it, was he had to make sure to let his heart break. And he said, it's only when my heart breaks that it can grow a little bit and then get ready for the next people that I'm supposed to love.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to say I've always lived that out perfectly, but I try to, if my heart is breaking and I'm super stressed about leaving a parish, I always try to remind myself it's probably a good sign.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it means I loved it there.
Yeah. You actually invested in it. So
yeah. But it is, I'm not going to lie, it's hard.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. One more thing quick before we go. If a young man came to you and said, "Hey, Father Thuringer, I'm kind of thinking about going to seminary, or I think maybe God is asking me to be a priest," what do you say to him?
The kind of typical answer, which is true, is I've never seen a man go to seminary and become a worse man.
Right.
And so if you go, you will be blessed, even if you don't end up becoming a priest, right? And if you have the question, then you need to seek the answer.
Yeah.
And you're only going to get the answer from one person, and that's God.
Yep.
Right? So go to his seminary, right? The deeper kind of personal thing that I would say is that God knows you. And if he's calling you, he's going to give you the graces that you need. And you're going to find through seminary that the truest, best parts of you are brought to the surface by what's being called out of you, right? And if you end up not being called, then you're going to find that those truest, deepest parts will be brought out of you through marriage or a holy order or something like that. But so you really have nothing to lose. And in fact, the thing you have to gain is becoming the man God made you to be.
Yes.
And so jump, jump at the opportunity.
Yeah. I'm really glad you tell them that they aren't going to come out of there worse people. In fact, many of the men who've gone to seminary and discerned out make the best husbands.
Yeah.
So you won't be worse to do it. So Father Thuringer, thank you so much for coming in and telling us your story. I really appreciate it. It's a great story. I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but we only have so much time.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thanks for having me.
And we're going to have Father Thuringer back to talk about a topic around the Holy Land. So stay tuned for that. We will have him back again. Thanks for being here. All right. If you want to find out more about vocations, you can always go to the diocesan website at sfcatholic.org anytime. You can go under the vocations tab somewhere in there. You'll be able to find it. So you can get more information. Father Kapperman is the current vocations director, and he's fantastic. So talk to him anytime. That's it for us today. Hope you'll join us again next week for more Catholic Views.